The courtroom in Greenville, a quiet Tennessee town nestled in the foothills, hummed with hushed conversations as Judge Evelyn Hart adjusted her robe. Her 25 years on the bench had seen countless cases, but today felt different. The air was dense, charged with an unspoken tension she couldn't quite name. "All rise," the bailiff commanded, his voice firm. Evelyn stood as the defendant entered, flanked by 2 deputies. She readied herself to project the impartiality her role demanded, but when her eyes met his, the pen in her hand slipped, clattering onto the bench. It was him. Her breath caught, but she quickly masked it, her practiced composure cloaking the tempest within. Standing before her, shackled and subdued, was Jack Wilder, the boy who had once shared her lunchbox in 2nd grade, who had climbed trees with her during summers, and who had stolen her first kiss beneath the bleachers of their middle school football field. But decades had passed. Jack was no longer the golden-haired boy with the mischievous grin. The man before her was weathered, his face etched with hardship. His eyes, though, gray-blue and haunting, hadn't changed. "Your Honor," the prosecutor's voice shattered her reverie. Evelyn straightened, gripping her gavel. "Proceed," she said, her voice steady despite the storm within. The charges were grim: aggravated assault, breaking and entering, a string of crimes that didn't align with the Jack she had known. As the prosecutor recited the details, Evelyn's mind spun. Memories of Jack rescuing her from a stray dog, teaching her to skip stones, and making her laugh until her sides ached flooded back. The courtroom noise faded, and all she could see was him, her Jack, now an accused criminal. When Jack's gaze finally lifted to hers, the world seemed to tilt. Recognition flickered in his eyes, and his lips parted as if to speak. But he stopped himself. Evelyn's breath hitched. She clenched the edge of her bench, forcing herself to focus. The prosecutor laid out the case. Surveillance footage showed Jack leaving the scene of a hardware store break-in, bloodied and frantic. The store owner, Frank Daniels, was hospitalized with severe injuries. Witnesses placed Jack near the store, and tools matching the stolen items were found in his possession. Evelyn glanced at Jack. His shoulders were slumped, his face expressionless, but the boy she remembered, full of life and laughter, was gone. In his place stood a shadow of that boy, weighed down by time and circumstance. The defense attorney, Alan Griggs, argued that Jack had acted in self-defense. He contended Jack's presence at the scene was not as a perpetrator, but as a victim of an unknown assailant. Evelyn's impartiality was put to the test as she weighed both sides. The prosecutor painted Jack as a dangerous criminal. The defense claimed he was a man trapped in a tragic series of events. The courtroom adjourned for the day, and Evelyn watched as Jack was led away in handcuffs. Just before he disappeared through the doors, he glanced back at her. This time his eyes held something unexpected: fear. Not the fear of a guilty man, but of someone out of options. Evelyn sat alone in the empty courtroom, staring at the blank screen where the surveillance footage had played. Memories of their childhood together swirled in her mind. Racing bikes through oak-lined streets, skipping stones at the lake, and his promise to always protect her. Life had separated them, and Jack had veered down a darker path. But why? What had led him here? She spent the night wrestling with the decision before her. Recusing herself from the case would be the ethical choice, but a small voice in her mind whispered, "If not you, then who? Who else would see beyond the evidence to the boy she once knew?" The next morning she resolved to stay. She would step down only if her objectivity faltered. Until then, she owed it to both Jack and the justice system to uncover the truth. As court resumed, the defense called Jack to the stand. It was a bold, unexpected move. Jack walked to the witness stand, his shoulders squared but his hands trembling. He took the oath, his voice steady but subdued. Alan Griggs wasted no time. "Mr. Wilder, let's start with the night in question." Evelyn's gavel rested loosely in her hand. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of not just the law but the humanity it sought to serve. Whatever the outcome, she would ensure Jack Wilder's story, all of it, was heard. "Can you recount your actions on the evening in question?" Jack cleared his throat, his voice steady but tinged with unease. "I was walking past the hardware store when I heard yelling. At first it sounded like an argument, but then I heard something shatter. That's when I decided to check it out." And then, Jack hesitated before continuing, his gaze focused on the floor. "I saw a man attacking Mr. Daniels. I tried to step in, but the guy turned on me. We fought, and then he ran off. I stayed to help Daniels, but when I saw the police arrive, I panicked. I ran. I shouldn't have, but I didn't think anyone would believe me." The courtroom stirred with whispers until Judge Evelyn Parker silenced the room with a firm rap of her gavel. "Order," she commanded, though her pulse quickened beneath her calm demeanor. The prosecutor, Alan Griggs, pressed on. "You mentioned seeing a man attacking Mr. Daniels. Did you recognize him?" Jack shook his head. "No, he had a hoodie on, and it was dark. I couldn't make out his face." "Then why flee instead of explaining this to the authorities?" Jack sighed heavily, his voice laced with regret. "Because of my record. People like me don't get the benefit of the doubt." His words hung heavy in the air, resonating with a bitter truth. Evelyn's chest tightened. She knew all too well how Greenville treated those who had stumbled in the past. Jack's criminal history made him an easy target. As the questioning continued, she found herself scrutinizing Jack closely. His tone, his body language. His words felt sincere, but were her memories of him as a teenager clouding her judgment? That evening, as she reviewed the case in her chambers, Evelyn's thoughts drifted back to a summer long ago. She and Jack had sat by the lake, dreaming of their futures. "You'll be a great lawyer one day," Jack had said, skipping a pebble across the water. "You'll fight for people who need it." "And you?" she had asked, teasing him. "I'll probably just get into trouble," he'd replied with a grin. Shaking her head, Evelyn forced herself back to the present. She had a verdict to oversee, and the weight of her responsibility loomed large. The next day in court, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Jack leaned over to whisper something to his attorney, Alan. After a moment's hesitation, Alan addressed the judge. "Your Honor, my client wishes to make a statement." The courtroom fell silent. Defendants rarely spoke directly. It was a risk that could either sway the jury or sink their case. Evelyn gave a reluctant nod, signaling her approval. Jack stood, his movements slow and deliberate. The chains on his wrists clinked softly, echoing in the stillness. Gripping the podium, he began, "When I was a kid, I had dreams like anyone else. I wanted to make something of myself, to matter. But life doesn't always go the way you plan." Evelyn felt a lump in her throat, but kept her expression neutral. "I'm not here to claim I've been perfect," Jack continued. "I've made mistakes, plenty of them. But that night I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I was trying to stop something worse." He paused, his gaze moving across the jurors, the attorneys, and finally landing on Evelyn. "I panicked because I knew no one would believe me. My past doesn't paint me as the good guy, but I'm not the villain they're making me out to be." His voice faltered. "I've lost so much. My parents, my friends, and even my sense of who I am. But today, I'm asking you to see me as more than my mistakes. I didn't hurt Mr. Daniels. I tried to help." The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as Jack returned to his seat, his shoulders heavy with vulnerability. Evelyn tightened her grip on her armrests, her emotions threatening to surface. The prosecution launched into a rebuttal, attacking Jack's credibility and highlighting inconsistencies in his testimony. Evelyn listened intently, her face betraying nothing of the inner conflict she felt. When the jury returned with their verdict, the air was thick with anticipation. Evelyn unfolded the slip of paper handed to her by the bailiff, her heart pounding. "In the case of the state of Tennessee versus Jack Wilder," she announced, "the jury finds the defendant not guilty." The room erupted, gasps, cries, and whispered relief. Jack exhaled deeply, his hands trembling as he clasped them together. Evelyn struck her gavel. "Order!" she commanded, her voice firm. Once the room quieted, she declared, "The defendant is free to go. Court is adjourned." Jack turned to Alan, who shook his hand, but his eyes quickly found Evelyn. As the room emptied, he approached her, his voice low. "Thank you." Evelyn shook her head. "The jury made the decision, not me." "Still," he said softly, "thank you." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared history hanging between them. Evelyn finally spoke. "Make this your turning point, Jack. Don't waste it." His expression grew serious. "I won't." Later that evening, alone in her chambers, Evelyn reflected on the trial. Jack's story wasn't unique. The system often punished people more for their past than for who they were trying to become. But today felt like a small victory, not just for Jack, but for the belief that people could change if given the chance. She picked up a photo of her father from her desk, his words echoing in her mind. "Justice is blind, but fairness takes heart." Evelyn smiled faintly. She couldn't change Jack's past, but she hoped the verdict would give him a chance to rewrite his future.